This is an act of vulnerability. It is a response to all of the people who have criticized me online. It is a commentary on the behavior I have seen from various creators, streamers, influencers, and the people who admire them. Some of whom I imagine are here watching this right now. This is about being wrong. Hi Swolemates, welcome back, and dog bless you. Do we like the new name, your new title? I really hope so, because I'm not changing it. I get a fair number of comments on my videos challenging me and telling me I'm wrong about things, which is pretty normal. Some of these are simple misunderstandings, and some of them are from people who comment halfway through the video after making incorrect assumptions about where a point was going. Some of these are intentional misinterpretation for the purpose of power tripping, weaponizing correction to feel in control, or sometimes intentionally molding a topic into something better resembling your own area of expertise to justify an essay format info dump specifically for the purpose of flexing. And you know, I was a hyperfixated university student once too. I'm not going to judge. But I am going to gently encourage some of you to play the "is this actually relevant" game before hitting me with 12 paragraphs on solipsistic philosophy in response to a video on a completely unrelated topic. Just as a totally random, non-specific example. However, a lot of the challenges and corrections that I'm offered as a YouTuber go back to the very same shocking origin, and that is that sometimes I am just wrong about things. There it is. Taking criticism is something that I get a lot of opportunities to do as someone who makes videos like the ones I make, because a lot of my miscommunications, misinterpretations, and misconceptions are immortalized forever on a public platform, even after I have grown past them. Which means I get to see people respond in real time to things that I've said weeks, months, and even years ago. And the thing is, I don't actually agree with everything I've said on this channel, at least not anymore. It might just be the wording, it might be the very concept being described, but either way, I very much do not stand behind every single thing I've said here, which is a good thing, because it means I've learned and grown. Certainly due in no small part to the people who have offered that genuine correction, and at least partially thanks to the people who are just power tripping and picking fights, but we'll get to that. First, a word from today's sponsor. My wonderful patrons. There's no cutaway. I just want to thank my patrons for making videos like this one possible. Your Patreon subscriptions are the reason that I was able to hire the wonderful Babilla, who you should go subscribe to edit this video. Check the description for a link if you would like to sign up and support this channel. However, if money is tight, or if you like me but just aren't ready for a Patreon commitment, you can also like, subscribe, share, comment, all of that good stuff. That really helps as well. But that's it. Ad read over. I want to start by laying some cards on the table, but I gotta stress that I'm not asking for forgiveness because I haven't personally wronged anyone. What I'm about to do here is for me, both to put what I've learned into words and to help you understand me better. So without further ado, here are some things that I was wrong about. This is probably the one I hear about the most, but in my Lost in Transition video, I say that female privilege does not exist. Now, I did explain my reasoning. That the perceived areas of privilege that benefit women are born out of the same structures that subjugate them, so it doesn't necessarily seem right to describe what they are experiencing as privilege. But I have since learned more and changed my thinking. Because patriarchy harms all genders, and is built around binary comparisons and competition. Under a system like this, it means that somebody benefits when other people lose. That's the way it's been set up. Women may face greater harm under patriarchy, but those who participate within it are still granted benefits if it serves the status quo. For example, women being able to more freely express their emotions might be tied to the negative stereotype of women as irrational, but that doesn't necessarily cancel out the benefit of having that freedom of emotional expression. It's just two things existing simultaneously. A man expressing pretty much any emotion outside of anger is condemned within patriarchal thinking, and what is that if not subjugation as well? It absolutely comes with an assumed level of competency and respect that isn't afforded to women, but only if he performs within a restrictive set of standards, and only if his manhood intersects with a specific set of other characteristics. It doesn't make sense to say that patriarchy harms men and then erase the ways that men are disadvantaged, or the double standards that benefit women. There are ways that women reinforce patriarchy, and the incentive to do so is the privilege it can offer. If you experience incentive to maintain the status quo that is unique and specific to your identity, it is probably privilege, even if you are marginalized in some way. We need to step away from this all or nothing thinking, because human beings are more complicated than that, especially when you factor in all the other facets of identity that interact with gender. How someone is racialized, socioeconomic status, disability, the list goes on. It's less points being granted and taken away based on identity, and more like you are given a certain number of advantage tokens and disadvantage tokens that are all context dependent in how active they are. Some people may have more active disadvantages than advantages, but most people do have some combination of both, and they exist simultaneously rather than canceling each other out. I anticipate some pushback on this one, so please know that I am still working through my thoughts and kind of figuring out how to best communicate these ideas. I do intend to revisit this one at some point, and I would really love to hear people's perspectives because it does help, especially when they are offered with the intent of helping. Anyway, next thing. This one I came to on my own, and I have touched on it before, but I would like to explain further. I don't think that toxic masculinity is a helpful term, or at the very least, I don't think it accomplishes what we are intending to accomplish by bringing it into the conversation. Obviously, there are bad faith actors out there who argue that toxic masculinity is saying all masculinity is toxic, even though they know perfectly well that it's just describing a harmful subset of it. They are time wasters. They get it. They understand, they are just playing dumb to belabor a spicy talking point. But even for the people who understand the concept, or at least what is intended when the term is used, I think we can do better. I worry that this phrase has too many assumptions and too much baggage and too much culture around it at this point that it feeds this idea of the bad man archetype. Specifically, this bad man archetype that colors our perceptions of people who might be struggling and in need of community help. Typically by neglecting the fact that being a man is just one facet of identity that interacts with a bunch of others, like I already mentioned. It has notes of meritocracy, that the individual in question is simply someone who needs to own their shit rather than a human being who is sitting at a complicated convergence of social power and victimhood that is context dependent. These days, I prefer the term patriarchal manhood because it emphasizes that men too are subject to patriarchy rather than the sole enforcers of it. That women, and more rarely but occasionally other genders, can still reinforce patriarchal gender roles. That there is masculinity outside of these harmful constructs. And that critiquing a system is not the same as critiquing some kind of feature inherent to an identity, in this case masculinity to manhood. Now, don't get me wrong. When it comes to personal growth, there is a certain amount of owning your shit that does need to happen, but one of the ways that patriarchal manhood perpetuates itself is by including self-assuredness and unwillingness to compromise as essential traits in the very idea of what a man is. Which means, if you're a man, it's basically holding your identity hostage and then granting validation based on how well you perform to its standards, all of which are built around defending it. So for someone still grasping at that validation, primed to see any pushback as getting between him and his very identity, all he is going to see in the phrase toxic masculinity is the assertion that he himself is poison. But people are more than one thing, even those with certain venomous behaviors, and like I already said, we need to get better at separating the person from the system. For me, toxic masculinity describes certain accusatory thinking that I used to hold on to, thinking that I have since learned isn't actually helpful, that is at odds with how I want to see other people and how I want them to respond to me. So for that reason, I have been working on dropping it from my lexicon. Obviously, female privilege and toxic masculinity are just two examples of many when it comes to things that I have been wrong about. I chose them because they are things that impact me personally, things that I have discussed online, things that I have very strong feelings about, but have changed my thoughts on. But this isn't always an easy thing to do. Lord knows I have struggled with it in the past, and I think it's important to be honest about that. And it's not just a matter of pride and ego. For a lot of us, this is influenced pretty heavily by a complicated cocktail of competitive colonial culture, a little bit of schooling, and for many people, religious teachings as well. Basically, there are a lot of external factors. This isn't strictly an internal thing. The very word correction carries a lot of baggage for many people because it's often associated with shame and punishment, the idea of training out undesirable thinking or behaviors. So I want to gently push back on this association for those of you who have it. Let's try, for this discussion at least, to look at being corrected as simply that. Adding new information or discarding irrelevant information to become more accurate in our thinking. Now then, nearly all of us have at least one example of being corrected, being wrong about something, and feeling shit about it. Maybe you were caught talking out your ass and felt ashamed. Or maybe you were misinformed on a topic that's important to you. Maybe it's something else entirely. Regardless, most of us like to think of ourselves as informed. So finding out that we're wrong about something is at odds with that belief. It's uncomfortable. because it leads to a feeling of incongruence, and it confronts us with the fact that our self-concept might not be as accurate as we think it is. It's almost like the self-image equivalent of being confronted by your own mortality. Obviously a lot less intense, but fallibility often feels threatening. It means we're not as in control as we believe we are, and that can make us feel insecure. Now, obviously confronting wrongness isn't always uncomfortable. I am purposely highlighting situations where it is, and one thing that most of those situations tend to have in common is the presence of witnesses. Because at that point, you're not only confronting how you feel about yourself, but how you think other people feel about you as well. Goes without saying that in the internet age, this reaches further than it ever has before. It used to be that these incidents were isolated, but our communication technology has advanced a lot faster than our communication capacity. Thanks to social media, being wrong is a lot more high stakes because it's now immortalized forever on a platform accessible to an audience too huge for our minds to even Immortalized forever on a platform that is accessible to an audience too huge for our minds to even comprehend. Each person only has so much social brain space available, and it's a lot smaller than you think it is, which means that large-scale interaction forces us to simplify people in dangerous ways. A group of individuals becomes a single entity so that we can process the message we associate with them. And when a single person is identifiable, they are often reduced to their mistakes or how other people feel about them, rather than recognized as a complex person on a trajectory. Even under the best of circumstances, this structure erases individual perspectives and the fact that making mistakes is a normal part of being human. And in cases where someone is facing backlash for being kind of a knucklehead, it blends the genuine effort to help them learn with the vengeful desire to see them punished. It also grants anonymity to those who are out for blood, which is some pretty impenetrable armor. If you face greater scrutiny with a surplus of visibility, then you face less scrutiny with a deficit of it. Too much critical attention can lead to shitty behaviors, but so can too little. The public record of our actions also means that we no longer get to enjoy our mistakes being things that exist only in memory. Things we can move on from that lessen with intensity over time for both the mistake maker and anyone else who is impacted. So we have a bit of a dilemma. We can end up suspended in retribution when we really need to begin the process of letting things go. Mistakes are tools to inform us, but they need the opportunity to become memories rather than active cardinal traits. Hard to do when everything that happens is frozen in time and fresh to anyone who sees it. Harder still when we are responding to a crowd, rather than identifiable individuals that we can form some kind of personal attachment to. I chose creators and their audiences as a means of exploring this topic for a few reasons. The first is that it's something I have personal investment in, and I want to share my reflective work. The second is that it gives an exaggerated example of something that affects nearly all of us in smaller ways, that is, online visibility and socializing. And the third is that I would like to encourage everyone, regardless of where they sit in this dynamic, to be more actively aware of its effect on their own perspective, because all of this isn't going away anytime soon. And if the venue was intentionally created, how we handle the fallout must be intentional as well. So let's talk about parasociality, criticism, and fucking up. The dynamic of creator and audience is complicated, especially if you're a social commentator. It's discussing intimate social problems through a parasocial venue, which means the audience can know a speaker's inner thoughts on heavy topics without necessarily knowing them as a person, so it ends up just feeling like they do. A creator's very being becomes a source of entertainment and a piece of the viewer's personal identity based on said viewer's emotional reaction to them, good or bad. It can be easy to forget that they are a multifaceted human being, someone who f***s up, says things they later regret, changes their mind, and is constantly shifting in response to their surroundings, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. This tendency to forget someone's humanity is something both the creator and audience can be guilty of, and it's affected by the aversion to being wrong from both parties. Someone defending their problematic fave isn't just defending a person, they're defending what that person means to them. They're reacting negatively to the fact that they might be wrong about the image that they have of someone. An image based on just one aspect of their identity, who they are when the camera's on. Being observed tends to change our behavior, and our behavior influences our thinking, so time spent being visible is time spent under this effect. We know social media messes with its users' confidence and self-image. So what happens to someone's understanding of themselves when they're an information provider, entertainer, influencer, or commentator via social media or streaming service? I'm seriously asking because I'm someone who does this shit and I would like to do so in a healthy way. I think most content creators know objectively that they're normal-ass people who make mistakes, but put some of them in front of their audience and that understanding can get a little bit flimsy. Especially if part of their online image is built around being right about things. The person with the answers who shuts down those without. which means that when they're corrected, it's not just an isolated incident, but a threat to their entire brand. And given that for most people, it's already uncomfortable to admit when we're wrong, when we get a combination of viewers defending their emotional investment in a creator and said creator defending their image, it is gasoline on that fire. Now, I'm not saying that every single person making or consuming content on the internet falls into this trap, but a lot do. Certainly enough that any of you watching this right now could probably call at least one example to mind, or maybe even recognize your own hand in it if you're feeling particularly reflective. Collectively, we don't really leave a whole lot of space for people to be wrong. At least we haven't spent time modeling what that should look like in the current social climate, how to point it out effectively, and how to let it become an informative memory rather than a defining feature, part of the brand. To complicate things even further, basically anyone with any sort of visibility and a lick of shame posts their content with the ever-looming awareness of weaponized feedback because they have run into it before. People on the hunt for conflict do exist, and while it takes planning, cooperation, and organized labor to build a house, it only takes one destructive asshole with a match to burn it all down. Bad actors may be a minority, but they can still do a lot of harm. It doesn't take much bullying from strangers to make someone withdraw from any feedback from strangers, even those who are trying to help or who have more insight in a given situation and should be heard. Because when you're already on the defensive, completely justified anger and an attack for its own sake often look exactly the same. I think this is part of why so many creators face such intense backlash when they screw up and are so quick to double down or hide instead of owning it. The ramifications feel a lot more personal to anyone impacted, but it's a one-way street. It's intensely emotional feedback coming from total strangers who know you in some capacity, but aren't known to you at all. This can be incredibly isolating and painful, while also making it harder to do any meaningful work to remedy the problem. Because there's no personal connection or ability to identify who was hurt. Everyone just looks like the same faceless, impersonal critic. So many people with any kind of platform face a unique struggle in admitting when they're wrong. Not only is it hard to see who you're owning up to, it's hard to find the line between defending your ego and defending your personhood. That is, your freedom to make mistakes, something we all do. The more exalted you are by some, and hated you are by others, the harder it is to center your own fallibility without feeling attacked. Hence why we have YouTuber apology syndrome and refusals to listen and do better, because acknowledging mistakes should be about making amends and improving ourselves and how we treat others, but with this social structure, it becomes about placating a fan base and seeking forgiveness by popular vote. Not to mention the content. And we love that, don't we? We love other people's mistakes. One of the best ways to guarantee views is with the promise of airing interpersonal drama. I bet a lot of you are really pissed about the clickbait title right now, and this isn't going to be easy for me, but I do need to take a second and say that I am really, truly, deeply, not even a little bit sorry. If this has made you uncomfortable and pushed you to address your part in the drama industrial complex, good. Let's sit with that discomfort and self-awareness for a moment before continuing on to this next bit. I'll pop a timer up here, 5 seconds. Awesome. So, you gotta wonder how much of the public apology non-apologies are simply people doing what we, the audience, have trained them to do, and how much of their scrambling to offer context that detracts from personal responsibility goes back to people trying to humanize themselves in this deeply dehumanizing social landscape. Absolutely none of this is to say that people who have made mistakes, especially the kind that have caused harm, are completely innocent and off the hook. You do assume a certain level of additional responsibility when you choose to become visible. Having an online platform is a privilege. No one is forcing anyone to do that. What I'm arguing for is that we need to be able to be our own critics if we are going to get anywhere. All of us. To remember our fallibility and the humanity of other people, and to practice new kinds of social healing. To ask ourselves if the actions we're taking are truly part of a solution or a byproduct of the social media performance that is intended to feed an image rather than improve our surroundings. To get extra personal for a second, when I own my mistakes, I am not doing so because I was asked to or to assuage my guilt. I'm not apologizing unless I have personally harmed someone, and in that case, it ain't content, so you're not going to see a video about it. I own my mistakes because it is important for me to be honest, accurate, and supportive of other people. That's it. I value those things, so I do my best to uphold them and surround myself with other people who do the same. Which means I make a point of supporting creators who self-correct. It also means that when someone drops into the comments with genuine correction, I assume good faith, even if I don't agree outright with what's being said. It's not always possible or a good idea to read the comments, I realize. I'm just saying that there's often good stuff to be found down there, even when it's critical. Now, all of this isn't specific to making content, but literally anyone who engages on social media does face this dilemma to some extent, because we have all been given the ability to cultivate a very specific image that we put out there, and we are all reacting to equally as cultivated images from other people. On social media, what we are seeing and what we are showing are the things that we have decided we want other people to see. They are the things that we have decided we want other people to believe about us. And these things alone, with that framing, can tell you a lot about someone's values. Likewise, how we engage with these things, that can offer some insight as well. Cultivating a flawless image isn't necessarily healthy. These platforms make it easier to hide our fallibility, but harder to hide from it when it inevitably rears its head, which it's going to do, because we all f*** up. It also makes it harder to address these problems in the ways that our brains have actually evolved to. So we have to find solutions. We have to choose to make it visible. We have to choose to engage with it directly. And we have to maintain a space where people can do that effectively. Recognizing this phenomenon is step one in changing it, whether you are someone who creates content, someone who consumes content, or both. We have to start having a productive conversation about how we respond to people being wrong and how to be wrong ourselves. And here we come to the advice section. Keep in mind, I'm not an expert or an authority. I'm just doing my best and sharing what I have learned. Not to mention responding to the people who have specifically asked for more advice. This is kind of an ongoing problem that hasn't really been mapped, so it's going to take all of us discussing it together to really get anywhere. With that said, I would like to go over some tips when it comes to adjusting our thinking and handling wrongness in the age of social media. First and foremost, remember that proving someone else wrong is not the same as you being right. It can be, but even in those situations, it's generally better to demonstrate why you are correct rather than why the other person isn't. Debunking can be important and does have its place, but if you really want to change someone's mind in a lasting way, you have to give them something to switch to rather than just getting rid of what's there. The current structure of discourse in online spaces is unbelievably competitive, and this is incredibly frustrating to see, especially from people who consider themselves leftists. Viewing social interactions as competitive ventures in which there is a winner and a loser means that everyone has already lost. Being right is only the win when the goal that you have set out to achieve is boosting your own ego. The real win is when something tangible is gained. Like, for example, somebody understanding something that they didn't previously get. So how do we get there? In order to change someone's mind, you have to first get a good understanding of what presently lives in their brain, which means you need to listen to understand instead of listening to criticize. Barring extremely obvious examples like hate speech, what you prioritize when you listen to another person reflects just as much on the quality of your character as it does on the content of what's being said. There is a certain arrogance in approaching conversation on the hunt for things to criticize and correct. You have prematurely assumed that the greater value is in what you have to offer instead of what you are being given. And I know this because I was that asshole in the past. Even now, I know there are people watching who are armed with whataboutisms they're ready to dive into the comments with, such as having to approach conversation on the defensive because of facing discrimination. This is actually a good example of the problem that I was just describing, because it is jumping to a scenario that invalidates the talking points rather than an equally as plausible scenario where the advice might apply, such as talking to someone who shares important aspects of your identity but might lack your experience. Sometimes the problem really is a nail and you need a hammer, but that doesn't mean you throw all of your other tools in the trash. The point I'm really trying to get at here is that people who are less informed than you still bring something valuable to the conversation simply by having a perspective that isn't yours, and hearing them out is not the same as validating their ignorance. You don't need to uncritically accept someone else's input to understand their perspective, but you do need to understand their perspective if you are going to offer effective correction. And it is essential to remember the human in this process. Even the most misinformed people are still people and should be treated as such. Doing this not only makes them more receptive to your feedback, but it also helps you get a better understanding of how misinformation comes to be, which is useful if you are looking to dismantle it. Next, and I cannot stress this enough, do not make correcting someone a public spectacle. We know the discomfort of being wrong is positively correlated with the size of the audience, and if you think that feedback needs to be publicly visible to be meaningful, you might have social media poisoning. Not everything is content. Not everything is everyone else's business, and not only do some things work better without an audience, it is often essential that there isn't one. If you sincerely want someone to change their mind, make sure the feedback is direct and personal. I know this isn't really easy to do if the person who messed up is someone you only have a parasocial connection to, but at that point it might be important to ask yourself if you're the best person for the task. If you are part of the faceless crowd, it is unlikely your input is going to be anything but another drop in the anger bucket, even if you're right, and even if it's well intended. It might also help to ask where the need to address that person is actually coming from. Maybe it's a sense of social responsibility, or maybe you're reacting defensively because you're used to being attacked. Either way, is it fair or helpful to you to take on that emotional labor? Often, our time and energy is better spent putting good information out there rather than just condemning bad takes. It's the difference between stomping out a fire versus just pouring water on it. You could exhaust yourself and risk getting burned in the process, or you could just use a counteractive element. One of the most important principles you learn in martial arts is economy of motion. Technique that gives you as much force and stability with as little energy expenditure as possible. This thinking can be applied to emotional energy as well, by assessing the intended effect and then asking which means of achieving it would be easiest for you. Which brings me to the final tip, which is to make your intentions clear, not just to the other person, but to yourself as well. Why are you offering criticism, and what is the end goal? Because if you sincerely want someone to change their mind and do better, you need to be conscious and intentional with how you communicate, which means you need to know where you are speaking from. If you are lashing out to find catharsis, it is about a temporary sense of power, not about preventing further harm or finding a sustainable solution. If you're correcting someone specifically to signal to other people that you're smart or that you get it, it is about your image, not about correcting misinformation. And here's the thing, if that is what you need in that moment, go for it. Just be honest about your intentions and what you're trying to accomplish. Don't say it's about helping someone else or seeking justice when it's about making yourself feel better or look good. Just be real about it, both for yourself and for the other party, and for anyone else who might be observing the interaction. You'll find more personal value in the things you do intentionally. And if acknowledging your intent makes you uncomfortable, there might be something to unpack there. Effective correction has to feel like an opportunity to know better, not a punishment for not already knowing, which means that for change to have a chance, it has to really matter to the person who is seeking it. None of this is to say you can't have your honest reactions to other people's ignorance. You can, and you should. And within that, you can learn to recognize when it is about your own feelings and sense of self, and when it is about the actual value of educating another person. Aronok, who you should all subscribe to if you haven't already, is incredible at this. She both gives herself space to have and express her anger towards injustice and harm, while also recognizing when it is time to prioritize effective communication. They have come to me before to let me know that terminology I was using was harmful, and they explained this in a very helpful way. It was easy for me to adjust, both because it was important and because I could tell that the intention of helping me was genuine. I didn't have to navigate hurt feelings before implementing the change. I was able to put my emotional energy into the more meaningful work. Also, I learned something, which is always valuable. The terminology in question was a turf dog whistle that I will be talking about another day. I think it is important for the purpose of this discussion, though, to tell you that that's what it was, because I very much consider myself a trans activist. Which is to say, even those of us who are in the thick of these issues can be misinformed or make mistakes in how we talk about them. Because of the mutual relationship, it is easier to reach a friend or peer, but arguably a lot harder to confront them when they're wrong, which is why I wanted to use this example. The emotional stakes are higher, which means you need to be a lot more mindful in how you communicate and what your intentions are. And this is how we should be offering correction in general if we want it to be effective, because being wrong tends to be the bigger challenge. So we talked about giving criticism and the importance of recognizing feelings and intent. And I imagine that there were a number of people watching that who were a little bit irritated with me for a variety of reasons, and I really hope they have stuck around for this part. Because as important as it is to recognize that compassion and patience are pivotal when it comes to changing minds, it is equally, if not more important, to remember that emotions do not invalidate criticism. Yes, even anger. In fact, you can help give that person space to work through their anger, and in doing so, hopefully switch to a more compassionate conversation approach if you show that you are willing to engage with the criticism that they are offering. Responsibility for effective communication is a mutual thing. If you throw out someone's entire input because of how it was delivered, then you don't get to claim the stance of rationality and objectivity. You have prioritized emotions as well, in this case yours. You may have been internalizing while the other person was externalizing, but the motive is the same. It's protecting your feelings. Which is why I want to start this section with some tough love, because when it comes to being wrong, you often gotta just check your f***ing ego. It feels bad. Being wrong or making a highly visible mistake sucks ass. And yes, other people could make it easier on you by approaching nicely, or at the very least they could make it less distressing for you by not approaching with anger. But the style of approach does not change the fact that you f***ed up, and that is where you need to put your attention. In fact, that uncomfortable loss of agency that you likely experience after being corrected is best remedied by taking control of the things you can change, namely your own actions and thinking. So let's talk about some of the more self-compassionate ways that we can do this. Something I have found helpful to remember is that someone genuinely trying to correct your ignorance is actually paying you a compliment. That person has decided that you are worth an uncomfortable conversation that takes a lot of energy for them to have. It means they see some kind of value in talking to you about it, that they think you're likely someone who is going to listen and try to understand. This is especially true if they are approaching you about something that impacts them personally, likely something they have a lifetime of experience with. And it's important to keep in mind that a lifetime of engaging with something exhausting and difficult to deal with likely means that there are a lot of emotions on top of it, so they may or may not have the ability to communicate about it in a way that is palatable to you. But the fact that they are trying is meaningful, because it means they've decided to open themselves up to all of that hurt and potential negative feedback to communicate with you. So when someone shows you that you're worth it, see it as a compliment that it is, and listen, even if they're a little rough around the edges in their approach. You're getting confirmation of the fact that you are worth that time and energy, and the person approaching you is confirming that you are in fact someone who is safe to communicate with, which means next time they're less likely to show up ready for a fight. Both of you get to skip to the recovery portion a lot faster. Genuine connection with the people around you means opening yourself up to occasional discomfort, and it's discomfort that we have all felt before. 9 times out of 10, when someone is coming at you with anger, it's because they need to be heard and they don't know how to effectively achieve that. Which is to say, a really good way to quell that anger is to listen. And for instances when you're unsure if someone is just coming at you to cause harm or power trip, assume good faith anyway. One of the best ways to stop a harmful grab for power is by dismantling this idea of correction as something that can grant it. You don't have to agree with them, but you can hear them out. Because if they're wrong, nothing has changed. Whether you engage with the criticism or not, it's going to be an uncomfortable moment. But if they have a point, and you find yourself feeling defensive, face it. Whether or not it was their intent, they have showed you an area that you can potentially improve on. Which is to say, yes, even people coming at you just to be confrontational can still give you something of value if you take the information and leave the rest. This is not the same as letting someone berate or bully you. In cases where someone is clearly just on the attack, block, breathe, and move on. This actually gets easier the more you engage with genuine feedback, because you learn how to identify the difference between harmful intent and those real opportunities to improve. Knowing how to protect yourself, how to identify and assert your own boundaries is an important part of this. When it comes to an internet presence, showing your work here can actually take power away from the people who just want to see you hurt. It becomes hard for them to concoct a narrative of you as someone unreasonable and unwilling to engage with feedback when you make it clear that you are someone who listens and is willing to do that work. TLDR, people are more likely to approach you in good faith when you make it clear that it's effective for them to do so. And when all else fails, remember you can step away from being observed. If you're not in a headspace to receive feedback, are you in a headspace to be highly visible or part of a charged exchange? Socializing on the internet is a delicate balance, especially post-pandemic. A lot of us were pushed into seeing it as our primary means of interaction because it became the only option. However, and this can be a very difficult thing to remember when you are craving connection, Sometimes just being alone is less lonely than being surrounded by the wrong kind of attention. If you catch yourself feeling stuck on the defensive or failing to consider other people's perspectives, it might be time for a break. Because at that point, you are feeling the impersonal vastness of the online space more so than the connection that it can offer. Practice examining your feelings and ideas without the onlookers. Because if you're struggling to take feedback, it's often about how it's being offered rather than the feedback itself. And if you're too caught up in your own performance, you might be missing the whole show. The internet can often impede our growth and overall wellness. Just the experience of being psychologically impacted by hypervisibility is often framed with an air of judgment. Touch grass, terminally online. Like you need to remove yourself in shame rather than in pursuit of wellness. So I'm not saying touch grass. I'm saying learn to recognize when it might be a good idea to do your version of touching grass. Personally, I'm very literal about it. I'm an outdoorsy boy, but you might prefer to disappear into a good book or your favorite video game. Listen to music. Make art. Find something that is just about you and your own enjoyment. Something that has value without validation from other people. Plus, it is harder for isolation to be weaponized against you when it is something that you can choose for your own benefit. But getting back to wrongness, whether you are doing this work on your own or responding to another person, it can help to remember that being wrong in the present means being right in the future. It's a psychological investment. We tend to be very good at looking back at our mistakes because we can see how much we've changed, yet we forget that change is still happening. At some point, there is going to be a future you looking back at the way you are now. So, how do you want to feel when that happens? You will never be a finished project because there is always more to learn. And that is important to remember both for yourself and the people you look up to. Someone who can't or won't engage with criticism, with even the mere possibility of being wrong, is choosing stagnation. And you should ask yourself if that is someone you would like to support. That kind of shit actually flies in the face of what makes humans successful, because acknowledging when we're wrong is adaptive. It is responding to pressures within our environment and adjusting to better function. So many people love to sing the praises of adaptability as a sign of success in other areas, yet they will double down when they are asked to change their mind or told that they're wrong about something in a social context. But if adaptation is about survival success, and humans are a social species, then social adaptation is just as important as its intellectual and physical counterparts. Arguably even more so, because social belonging is essential not only to our survival, but our flourishing. And regardless of our physical or intellectual performance, it can still grant us this. More on that in this video. Again, do not take this as me saying we should always concede to pushback. That is very much not what I'm getting at here. This is about recognizing the adaptive value of cognitive dissonance. A lot of us like to run from it or bury it under our pride, but the way to really make that discomfort go away is to face it and to make changes at the source. It's also about acknowledging how to select your own social sphere. Do you want to be a follower who idolizes figureheads who deny their mistakes, or build community with peers who learn from them? I'm just going to be blunt here. Don't be the kind of chuckle who conflates confidence with ego. Literally everyone is wrong about something at some point, so if you have found someone who is never openly wrong, they either have image cultivation aced and aren't showing you the whole picture, or they are so far up their own ass they believe their own shit. Either way, you could find better role models flipping rotten logs on a rainy day. If someone doesn't know how to gracefully take an L and model correction, they are just teaching you to avoid all of the challenges that will make you better. And if that's what you want, nobody's stopping you. But if you sincerely care about being right, you gotta learn how to recognize when you're wrong. So get good at admitting it, and surround yourself with people who do the same. And finally, remember your own personhood and look for the helpers. Anyone hiding behind anonymity to cause harm, or using important issues to police others, is doing what they feel they need to do. But it doesn't mean that they are treating you fairly. It doesn't mean you need to accept that treatment. Accountability is not a synonym for suffering. You are allowed to seek perspectives that provide feedback without vitriol, because they are out there. As important as it is for us to not run from criticism, it is also important to make sure that we internalize it in a healthy way. Centering your own humanity means regarding your own fallibility with kindness. was wearing pajama pants in every segment you just watched. Is it symbolic that my perceived professionalism was just a matter of angles and framing meant to conceal less presentable details that weren't in line with each visual theme? I don't know. Maybe. I just like PJ pants. I am recording this having already sent off each previous section to be finalized, so it's a little different from what was originally intended. Initially, it was going to be tying up loose ends and offering caveats. Like, for example, reminding any of the men who felt vindicated, perhaps aggressively so, during the female privilege section, that women benefiting in specific areas under patriarchy is not the same as women being directly responsible for men's disadvantages under patriarchy. Or to remind those of you who thought that I was talking about a specific person or instance that you are bringing your own filter to this discussion. If this felt applicable to you or someone else that you can call to mind, keep in mind that you're the one making that connection, because this was intended to be as general as possible. At certain points I may have had some examples in mind, but they were pretty varied, and I didn't name names for a reason. I also focused on calling myself out for a reason. I want people to come to these things because they see the opportunity for self-improvement, not because they were singled out. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh shit, he was talking about me, probably not. But also definitely yes. That is one of the weird things about this online social space. We all tend to be operating from this finely tuned self-image hub, which means many of us have a tendency to regard a given thing as for or about us in this space where everything is available. Like actually everything. The vast majority of which does not center around us as individuals. We have to stop looking specifically for ourselves in content or assuming that we will find personal relevance there and instead start examining why certain things make us feel a certain way. I have seen some pretty visceral, personal reactions to very general statements that have been made. Most of the time in online spaces, when this happens, it's not someone being addressed directly that elicits a reaction. It is that person reading personal relevance into what was said. So it's not necessarily about us, but it is about us. You know what I mean? More to the point, when it comes to being wrong or reacting to wrongness, the moment you feel threatened, it probably is about you. Just not in the way you think, more in the call is coming from inside the house way. And all of this was simply intended to give you some awareness and tools to handle those moments. However, in the interest of transparency, I think it's important to mention that there was a lot of selfish motivation here as well. I mentioned earlier that as someone who is choosing to be visible, I would like to do so in a healthy way, and the best way that I can think to do that is by encouraging self-awareness and empathy in how we navigate these spaces. In this, I also feel that it is important to be honest with you about the parts of my life that I am sharing, and drive home the point that there are many things I do not share, because that's not what they are for. But my mistakes are not on that list. I want those to be known, because they are an important part of my learning process. They are an important part of what makes me human. The nature of the internet means we need to consciously and intentionally engage with our mistakes. Generally speaking, a mistake visibly immortalized is going to need an equally as visible and immortal correction. When it comes to what we expect from others, it has to be voluntary. Accountability is not a retribution checklist built around meeting an imposed external standard. It is recognizing the impact of your words or actions and taking responsibility to make amends. Which means if you are pointing out someone's mistakes to make sure it doesn't happen again, it has to be with the genuine desire to help them understand. And if they don't meet you willingly, then there is nothing you can do. You don't have to forgive, you don't have to forget. But placing the key to your healing on the actions of another person is just further diminishing your own power. You can't force a personal change that someone doesn't want. I don't know if there's a clear answer here, but I am certain of that much, because all this does is feed the idea of restoration as a performance. Creating a social climate where people can checklist their way around sincerely caring about others is harmful to everyone involved. Those looking to shirk responsibility will use this to avoid it, and in doing so, outsource dealing with the hurt to everybody else. Anger is important, and you are right to feel it in the face of harm. And this exists alongside the reality that people listen, learn, and change more readily with kindness and understanding. And punishment is not an effective corrective tool. There is a massive body of research on this. From incarceration to spanking children, punishment does not work. It just adds more hurt. The reason I put this in the final section, the reason I put all the more delicate talking points towards the ends of my videos is because I know that the people who actually stick around are the ones who sincerely want to understand. I wanted everyone to find something in this, because we are all impacted by this if we use social media. But I specifically wanted the people who are struggling with ego, the people who are hiding from criticism, to feel seen before they felt confronted. Because the way social media has created this idea of externally imposed accountability is damaging. The way creators are seen as static entertainment rather than dynamic human beings is damaging. The framing of mistakes as a person's definitive features is damaging. But all of this being true doesn't grant you a free pass to not work on yourself. If you are actively avoiding doing so, maybe your critics have a point, and that's why you're feeling defensive. And all of this goes beyond how other people see us. Many of us who use these platforms are susceptible to believing our own image cultivation as well. So being honest and balanced in what we put out there is essential so that everyone can remember our humanity, including ourselves. So like I said, there is selfish motivation at play here. I make a point of acknowledging my mistakes as visibly as I made them for my own benefit, because I'm not about to build up a reputation I know I can't maintain. I'm a little messy. I make mistakes, and I only ever have my perspective. So if I want a more accurate understanding of the world, I need to listen to other people. I am drawn to creators who revisit ideas and correct themselves in the work they do. It creates a more reasonable, more human discussion space. One where everyone involved understands that being wrong is as enriching and essential to our humanity as being right. Acknowledging that you're wrong can and should be a good feeling. It means that you have addressed ignorance, you have grown as a person. You now have enough knowledge to look back at your former self and see where work has been accomplished. And as you develop this outlook, you get better at identifying the people who want to see you flourish rather than fail. Maybe more of us should put our cultivation efforts on that rather than our images. I am often wrong, and I hope I'll continue to be. Because the moment I start regarding myself as infallible or surrounding myself with people who defend and bury my mistakes rather than letting me learn from them, I have failed in my mission. Not just here on YouTube, but as a person in general, which is to simply do my best at any given time and keep improving. So to those who have corrected me from a helpful place, shared their experiences, put themselves out there, and let me in, thank you. Everything that I am doing here is trying to pay it forward. That's it for me for now. I really look forward to hearing your thoughts on this, especially if you took the listening to understand instead of listening to criticize approach. Maybe pop this emoji into your comment if so. Be kind to each other, assume good intent, and remember the humans. I will see you next time, and as always, thanks for watching.